I remember the day the whole town learned what my son really thought of me. It was a Saturday in July, one of those hot coastal mornings in Gull Point, Maine, when the harbor smells like salt and gasoline and the gulls trace lazy figure eights above the pier. The volunteer fire department had dragged out the folding tables for the summer fundraiser, and somebody's uncle was stirring chowder in a pot the size of a washtub. I brought my old seashell music box because the committee decided on a coastal memories theme and asked folks to lend decorations. The box had belonged to my husband, Jack. He found it when he worked tugboats out of Portland, bought it from a woman who sold trinkets near the ferry, and gave it to me the Christmas before he died. You crank the key, and it plays a simple tune. It never once failed. I set the box beside a mason jar of wild daisies and a paper flag garland. My son, Caleb, showed up late with his wife, Kinsey, and the look he tossed me from under his sunglasses would have curdled cream. He'd brought flyers for his new venture, the third one in 5 years, a food truck he'd named Lucky Finn. The truck was a glossy aquamarine that made people smile until they learned he was selling lobster rolls for $24 and couldn't make change when the square reader dropped the signal. He parked along the curb and flung open the service window as if applause were expected. Kinsey handled the cash box, and their 14-year-old daughter, Lila, my Lila, lined up paper baskets and tried to make the lemon wedges look professionally scattered. Caleb glanced across the street where I stood by the chowder table, and he gave me this little shake of his head, like he was warning me not to do anything embarrassing, like breathe. By noon, the line to Lucky Finn had dwindled, while the chowder was steady. Kinsey's mouth did that tiny twitch it does when she's calculating whose fault it might be. Caleb watched the people across the way and loudly complained about the Wi-Fi, the wind, the quality of the buns, the humidity, mercury, and retrograde. He sidled over, blocked my view, and said, "Ma, did you bring that box on purpose?" "It's for the table," I said. "Becky asked us to bring something personal." "It's junk," he said, not quietly. "Nobody wants a dead guy's music box scaring customers with old lady energy." It wasn't the first cruel thing he'd said to me, not by a long shot. But people were within earshot. The sheriff's wife, the woman who runs the library book club, a pair of little boys sharing a snow cone while their father stood behind them in a line of patients they'd never notice. The music box lay between the paper plates and the daisies. I rested my fingers on its lid the way you rest your palm on a dog who dozed off at your feet. "It's harmless," I answered. "It's nice. Jack's bad luck," he said. For a split second, I thought he meant it as a joke, and then he leaned close, smiling with all his teeth. "You know how much money I sunk into this truck because you told me to follow my heart?" he said softly. "Every time you touch any part of my life, I lose. When you co-signed that loan, I defaulted. When you helped me with the seafood shop, a nor'easter flooded it the first winter. When you babysat Lila during the tournament, the tire blew on the highway and we missed the finals. Don't you get it? You're bad luck, Ma. And this," he tapped the shell with his knuckle, "this right here is your little shrine to it." I felt something shift under my ribs, like a floorboard that gives just enough to tell you the crawl space beneath your house is hollowed out with rot. I lifted the box to move it, and he snatched it first. He held it up like a fisherman holds a catch he's about to gut. "Maybe we should throw it in the harbor," he said, and laughed, like this was a normal way for a son to speak to a mother. "Give that back," I said, not loud, but firm, the way I used to tell patients, "You're afraid, but you're safe." He rolled his eyes, tossed it, and I lunged. The lid popped, the music sprang from its spring, a wavering tune as old as rocking chairs, and the box hit the edge of the table and then the pavement. The sound splintered. Not the box. Me. The song wound down, and in the sudden quiet, I heard Kinsey announcing that the price for lobster rolls would be 20 even, cash preferred. The sheriff's wife stuck her spoon in the chowder and stared at her reflection. My granddaughter looked at me with a face she'd inherited from someone long before either of us. Caleb leaned in and said it plain, clicking his tongue the way you speak to a fussy customer. "You're bad luck, Eileen. Stay away from my business. Stay away from my life. You're a sinkhole. I'm done letting you drag me down." There are moments you can feel your life spin on a hinge. It doesn't make a sound anyone else hears, but you do. I bent, picked up the music box, and the lid shut clean. The daisies had tipped and a little river of chowder ran toward the curb. I could have made a scene, I suppose. I could have told the sheriff's wife that the boy she used to see riding his bike around our block had grown into a stranger. I could have told the book club lady that for 30 years I had held the hands of dying people who didn't want to be alone, and I had never heard words so hard as the ones my son had just said to me in a public place while his own child watched and pretended not to cry. Instead, I held the music box low to my chest, took a breath as deep as the harbor is wide, and said, "I'm going to take this home." "Do that," he said, "and take your bad juju with you." Kinsey pretended to be busy counting sixes. Lila kept folding napkins nobody asked her to fold. And I did something I hadn't done since Jack died. I went home without cleaning up. Gold Point looked like it always looks on an ordinary Saturday. Kids on bikes, a dog with a bandana chasing the spray from a sprinkler, a couple on their porch with iced tea and a box fan roaring. My house sat on Maple Street, 4 blocks from the pier. It was a clapboard 2-story with peeling white paint and green shutters that Jack kept swearing he'd fix when the weather cooled. He died on an icy January evening 13 years ago while I was working nights at the hospice center. A cardiac thing that took less time than it takes to make toast, the doctor said. He would have liked the Packers to go farther that year. He would think I did all right with the lawn, even though the crabgrass keeps joining the party uninvited. I set the music box on the kitchen table and locked the back door because for the first time in years, the kitchen didn't feel like safe ground. The fan on the oven hood rattled, the fridge hummed. Ordinary sounds, the kind you don't notice until the day you do. I took off my shoes and didn't change into slippers. The linoleum felt cool under my feet. I poured myself a glass of water and remembered the time the hospice director, a cheerful woman with a partridge tattoo behind one ear, told me, "Eileen, people think horror is messy, but most of the worst things are neat. They fit right into the afternoon." I washed the dust off the music box with a damp cloth and set it to dry in a square of sun. I wanted to cry, but something in me had turned already, and the tears didn't come. What came instead was clarity. I had spent years telling myself I understood Caleb because mothers make excuses almost as easily as they make dinner. Jack's death had been a sinkhole of grief for all of us, and grief makes people strange. I forgave Caleb when he quit his union job after 3 months because his boss hated initiative. I forgave him when he missed Lila's kindergarten graduation because he had to meet with a guy about a dream. I forgave him when he borrowed money and paid it back in apologies. I forgave and forgave until my forgiveness wasn't mercy anymore. It was the currency he preferred. I went upstairs to the bedroom that still smelled a little like the lavender sachet I kept in the closet. I opened the gunmetal drawer of the nightstand and pulled out a slim notebook I kept for numbers. Nurses love numbers. We're taught to track what you can't see. I made a list, like any list a person makes who's done fooling herself. Mortgage, paid off 10 years ago. Savings, enough for maybe 8 years if I don't get extravagant and nobody breaks a hip. IRA, a modest thing you gather like winter wood. Caleb's debts, I'd covered. $12,000 for the first shop lease when he wanted to sell bait and beer, $5,000 for the van after his license got suspended and I didn't want him taking the bus with Lila in the rain, $3,000 when Kenzie said braces were cheaper if you paid up front. And then the things I didn't write down because you can't. The hours listening to him list the people who had thwarted him, the sighs I swallowed so I didn't humiliate him with witness, the quiet I handed him because quiet is how you keep a person's dignity while they dismantle it themselves. When I finished the list, I flipped the notebook closed and stared at the ceiling. It's a funny ceiling, a little rippled. Jack and I laughed about it once. The man we hired to drywall had one eye that didn't track with the other, and the seams show if the afternoon light hits just right. "It's all right," Jack said, lying beside me. "The sun will catch our fault lines when it wants to." He liked to say things that made me want to write them down. I got up because when the clarity comes, you use it before it evaporates like the fog off the inland cove. I went to the kitchen and dialed a number I'd stored in my address book years ago but never called. Paul Redding, attorney at law, a man with a square jaw and a habit of wearing vests because he still believed they made an impression. He'd come to our hospice center once to talk about powers of attorney and advanced directives, and he'd spoken like a man who appreciated the way the word final sits in the throat. Redding Law, a receptionist said, and I recognized her voice as the girl who had been 2 grades ahead of my son and used to pick him for dodgeball teams because she felt bad. "This is Eileen Hart," I said. "I need to talk to Mr. Redding about my house and my will. Today, if he's got an opening, tomorrow, if not." "What's the urgency?" she asked because she knew me. "Because this town is small enough that people keep mental ledgers on one another's troubles." "It's not a life or death emergency," I said, "but it's a life emergency." He took me at 2:30. The office sat in an old Victorian on Beale Street with a russet rug that smelled like the school library. Redding stood when I walked in, which told me he remembered 2 things, my husband's funeral and the pie I brought his wife after her mother passed. I told him I wanted to set up a living trust for my house with Lila as the beneficiary when she turned 25. I wanted any rent from the property to go into that trust until the transfer, and I wanted a clause in the trust that would prevent anyone but Lila's trustee from touching a dime. I wanted my accounts separated into what I would use to live in peace and what Lila would inherit without interference. And I wanted to make it plain in every legal channel that Caleb would not be a trustee, co-signer, beneficiary, or decision-maker for anything I owned. He listened with his chin tipped down like a judge. And only when I finished did he lean back. "People usually come to this kind of decision gradually," he said. "You sound like you crossed the whole field before lunch." "A boy called his mother bad luck in front of a town," I said. "I did the gradual part for 13 years. He steepled his hands. "You're not obligated to explain it to me." "I'm explaining it to myself," I said, "so I don't walk this back." He took the notes. We signed papers. He told me what would need to happen if I decided to rent or sell and how to structure things so that the court couldn't be used to bludgeon me if my son decided to sue. He asked me if I wanted a restraining order, and I said, no, not yet. I didn't want Noah's flood for a summer squall. He nodded, slid forms into a folder, and told me his daughter still remembered how soft the blanket was that I wrapped around her grandmother on the last day. On my way home, I stopped at the bank. The assistant manager knew me the way people in small places know each other from PTA bake sales and Christmas pageants. I told her I wanted to open a new account and move a good portion of my money into it. I wanted to remove Caleb's emergency access from my existing checking account
and I wanted to cancel the second debit card that had been for groceries in a pinch 3 years ago and had become for takeout more often than that. She asked me for my ID, and I handed it to her, and when she tried to make small talk, I said, "Please, let's just do this." At home, I checked the doors again and made tea, and sat with the music box. I wound it gently and closed my eyes. The tune stuttered, one bent note, and then the tiny cylinder found the teeth of the comb again and played as if earlier had never happened. People say things about forgiveness being a choice. I believe it is, but there's a smaller choice that comes first. You decide where to aim your love. Jack used to say I loved like a flood. He told me once with a grin, "You don't trickle, you cover everything so there aren't any dry spots." When he died, I covered the people he left with the same flood. It kept everybody green for a while, but floods also wash away topsoil. You don't see it until the roots show.
I slept that night like someone who'd stacked her worries in neat piles and labeled them. In the morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long while. I took my coffee on the front steps and sat there until it cooled. Kinsey texted me a stream of messages asking if I could help a little this week because the truck still needed an ice machine repair and the generator ate gas like a dragon. I turned the phone face down. Lila texted too, with a picture of the dog she'd seen at the shelter who looked like a loaf of bread. I sent back a red heart. It was the first secret decision in a long time that didn't taste like guilt. Around 10, I heard Caleb's truck before I saw it. He'd never fixed the muffler. He wanted the world to know he was arriving. He didn't knock, which used to be fine because he's my son, but now felt like the second hand grabbing a minute by the cuff. He walked into the kitchen and saw the music box on the table. He sneered and reached for it, and I reached faster. His fingers brushed air. I put the box in a drawer, turned to him and said, "You will call before you come, every time. If you walk in unannounced again, I'll change the locks. Or I'll call the police, depending on my mood. Today, you got me on a good day." He laughed. "You're playing tough, Ma. It's cute." "You said I'm bad luck," I said. "I heard you." He shrugged. "People say things." "People say true things when their filters are tired," I said. "Pick up your face and listen. I met with a lawyer yesterday. I moved my money. The house is in a trust that you will not touch. If you try to borrow against it, the bank will turn off their coffee machine before they let you sit down. If you so much as hint that the house you want me to will to you belongs to anyone but me, you'll hear my attorney's voice in your voicemail before you get to the end of your sentence." "Wow," he said, hands up. "All because of a joke?" "I said you've never been funny, and I have been complicit. That ends now." He scanned the room like he was price checking it. "You can't actually think you're going to live on your own forever. I'm the one who'll be stuck with you when you start forgetting names." I poured more coffee. "Do you hear yourself?" "You don't get to turn this on me," he snapped. "You pushed me into half the choices that tanked. You said to follow my heart. My heart followed you, Ma. In 10 years, I won't have anything if you don't help me now." "You're 36, I said. 10 years is a person. You could raise one. You can raise your life. Or you can drown in it. Either way, I'm stepping out of the water." He slammed his palm on the table, hard enough that the music box in the drawer rattled. I didn't flinch, and I saw the surprise flicker across his face. "You're being dramatic," he said, like it was a war crime. "No," I said. "I was dramatic when I threw my back out carrying your freezer down a flight of stairs because it was a deal you couldn't pass up. This is not drama. This is policy." "Policy," he repeated, mocking. "Since when do you get to have policy?" "Since yesterday," I said, and I smiled. "Feels good."
He stared at me a long time, then laughed again, but the laugh was thinner. "You're not serious," he said. "You won't do this to your own child." "I did it first," I answered, and I showed him to the door with my body because words weren't doing it. He let me. He thought I'd wear out. I took a week and did what women do when they are finally free enough to prepare. I sorted. I made 3 piles: keep, donate, sell. I found a place to put the photographs that wouldn't fit on walls I no longer wanted to tend. I went to the county clerk's office and asked the woman there, a friend whose mother I'd known at the hospice, how long it would take to file a change of address notice if I decided to move out of state. 3 days, she said. "You all right, Eileen? People in this town could smell a storm." "I will be," I said. At night, I lay in bed and thought of places with clean water and kind neighbors and mountains that hold their tongues. Vermont kept floating up like a leaf you can't sink with a thumb. Years ago, on my first real vacation after Jack died, I had driven through the Green Mountains with a map and a thermos of coffee and cried at the sight of a lake so clear it reflected the sky and doubled the blue. I had written the name of the town on an old receipt and stuck it in the pocket of my wallet, a small private promise I never cashed. Willow Lake. Population a little over 2,000. A farmer's market in the summer, a diner that closed at 8, a woodworking shop that smelled like oiled walnuts. I took out that receipt and flattened it under a book. I called a number I found online for a rental listing and reached a woman named Martha Klein who said her sister had just moved to Florida and left behind a small lake house she wanted to rent to somebody with quiet shoes. "I used to be a nurse," I said, and Martha exhaled like a person who had been holding out for decency. "Would you like me to bring references?" "Save your ink," she said. "You want to drive up and see it?" "I'll take it sight unseen," I said before I could frighten myself out of it. We worked out details on the phone. First month and a security deposit. The rent would be within my means. The house had 2 bedrooms and a back porch with a view of water. "It's not fancy," Martha warned. "It's honest." "I'm tired of fancy," I said. "I'm dying for honest." I boxed up my life like I was leaving a theater after the show ran its course. I gave my church dresses to a thrift shop that lets women pick one outfit for free if they've got a job interview. I put a jar of sea glass near the sidewalk with a note that said, "Take 2, leave 1 memory." I hired a man with a truck to take the heavy pieces to a consignment warehouse. He asked why I was letting go of a perfectly good solid wood hutch. "Because it doesn't match my next place," I said, and he nodded as if that was the only answer a person ever needs. I told only 2 people about the move. I called my friend Daisy from the hospice center. She cried a little, then said, "You're the bravest woman I know." I told Lila one warm evening while we ate ice cream bars on my front steps. She lowered her face until her hair made a curtain and said, "Is it because of Dad?" I told her I loved her too much to answer that. "Will you see me?" she asked. "When you're old enough to choose," I said. "I will give you my address the day you turn 18. You can come any time after that you want. Before then, I'll call you from a number I will not give your parents. That's not because I don't trust you. It's because I won't put you in the position of protecting me from them." She pressed the stick from her ice cream into the dirt at the base of my little rose bush and made a cross that the wind toppled after a minute. She whispered, "I wish you could just stay." "I did," I said, and we sat there a long time while the mosquito truck droned in the distance and the neighborhood kids played a complicated game that involved yelling the words "no tagbacks" at intervals that made no sense. 2 nights before I left, I wrote a letter to Caleb and sealed it in a manila envelope. I slid it under his apartment door at dawn because I didn't want to see his face, while any part of me could still be persuaded by it. He texted me 20 minutes later in a font that felt like a shout. "What is this?" I didn't answer. I stood in my kitchen with my palms on the counter and waited for the calm to come back like a wave that had gone out too far. The letter said this:
Caleb, I am leaving Gull Point. By the time you read this, I will be on my way to a place I've wanted to live since before you knew what wanting was. I have arranged my affairs. The house on Maple Street is in a trust. You will not inherit it. You will not borrow against it. You will not enter it without permission from the property manager I have hired. If you try, you will meet a policeman called on a woman's behalf who has finally decided it is not a sin to protect herself. I have also made arrangements for Lila, so that if she wishes to be helped by me when she is an adult, she will be. If you try to insert yourself between her and what I leave her, you will find 5 separate forms standing beside her that have been notarized by a man who owns more gray suits than you own t-shirts. You said, I am bad luck. I thought about that for one night, and I decided to leave you my curse. Here it is. Everything you try to take without love will turn to dust in your hands. Everything you build on contempt will buckle. Every dollar you wring out of someone who is willing to go hungry for you will sour in your pocket. The curse is not magic. It is truth. It is a law of the world that a man can deny until he finds himself alone in a room with a mirror. I have left you another thing because I am still your mother and I still believe you can change. It is in the small wooden crate by my front door. If you open it and you do not lie to yourself, you will see exactly what you need to see. Ma. Inside the crate, I left a mirror. Nothing fancy, just a hardware store mirror in a wooden frame. On the back of it, I had written in marker, "The Curse." When the moving truck came, the driver asked if this was all. I told him yes. 2 suitcases, a box with the music box and some papers, a toolbox of jacks, a set of dishes I'd owned since Jimmy Carter. I locked the door behind me and put the key and a note inside an envelope for the property manager. I stuck it in the mailbox because she told me to, and then I stood on the sidewalk and looked at the house and felt nothing so much as relief. Goodbye, house. Thank you for holding so much. The drive to Vermont took a day and felt like the slow unbinding of something tight in my chest. The farther I went, the more my eyes relaxed. Maine fell behind me with its battered boats and stubborn light, and New Hampshire offered me a route through pine stands that whispered like friends who know enough to keep quiet. Vermont bloomed like a bruise healing, greens layered on browns. And when I saw Willow Lake for the first time in years, it looked exactly as I remembered it, except in one particular. I was ready for it. Martha's sister's place sat on a dirt road shaded by maples that arched like a cathedral. The house was small, white, with a roof that needed a man who knows how to fix roofs. The porch out back had a railing that would hold if you leaned gently. The water out beyond it lay so still that clouds looked like they'd been printed there. Martha met me with a smile that had few teeth because she wasn't vain. She handed me the key and said, "If the fuses blows, it's the second from the left." I labeled them with a Sharpie because I got tired of guessing. I liked her immediately. The first night I slept with the windows open and dreamed nothing. I woke to the sound of a loon fluting a line that rose and fell like breath. I made coffee and took it out to the porch. A squirrel sat on the rail and studied me like a probation officer. I told it good morning and meant it. Willow Lake had a diner where the pancakes came off the griddle the size of your skillet at home. It had a hardware store where the owner's grandson liked to wheel the old fan out onto the sidewalk on days when the air didn't move. It had a library with a reading group that nobody admitted was a reason some women had to leave their husbands and then pretend they left for the weather. It had a community center where I signed up to volunteer to sit with the old folks on Thursdays. I used to be a hospice nurse, I told the woman with the clipboard. She squeezed my hand like she knew exactly what those words cost a person. I found a rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, a walk along the road after the sun picked up, lunch that didn't come out of a styrofoam clamshell, an hour in the afternoon writing down whatever came to mind because the silence made room for thinking. On Thursdays, I sat with Mr. Peabody, who wore bolo ties and liked to tell stories about fixing engines that no one but him remembered. He fell asleep sometimes, and I watched the rise and fall of his chest like a tide, and felt grateful to be there, witnessing another person's breathing as a benevolent thing. I called Lila once a week from my new number. She kept our calls short because she didn't want to risk her mother walking in, but every few days she sent a picture, her sketchbook, her sneakers dirty from the softball field, the dog from the shelter that she hoped they'd let her adopt. I didn't tell her I owned 2 ceramic bowls already for a pet I didn't have. Hope is a small bowl you keep filled even on a day when you think you'll never be hungry again. 3 months after I arrived, I heard from Caleb, finally, not through a phone call, but through the bank in Gull Point, which sent me a polite message to say a man had tried to use my house as collateral for a small business loan. The woman at the bank had called my property manager, who had called Paul Redding, who had sent the bank a copy of the trust with a sticky note that said, "Please be advised you will waste a pot of coffee before you find a clause to allow this." I wrote Paul a thank you card and sent the property manager a candle that smelled like orange peel and took a long walk in the cold, bright air until my cheeks stung and my fingers refused to stay in my pockets. Kenzie left a voicemail on my old phone, the one I canceled, but kept as a clock by the bed. "Eileen, you've made your point. Can we talk? Lila misses you. We miss you." I listened to the way she said we and felt a sad kind of relief that I wasn't there to be charmed back into the room where I had agreed to live without oxygen. I made a friend in Willow Lake. 2, actually. The first was a man named Henry, who ran the wood shop near the edges of town. He taught kids how to make birdhouses on Saturdays and didn't talk much about himself, except to say his wife had left him 10 years ago for a man who wore a fedora. "I don't hate fedoras," he said, "but they make me suspicious of a person, like a very fancy leash." He had hands that looked like he'd built useful things and eyes that recognized when silence was the right tool. The second friend was a woman named Ruth who worked at the diner. She had hair like thistle and laughed at things that weren't quite jokes. She never left Vermont and had a way of saying the word beautiful, like a person prioritizing it in her budget. She said, "You're the lady who rents Marta's sister's place." And I said, "I am." And she said, "I'm glad you came." I kept the music box on my dresser. Sometimes at night I wound it and listened to the tunes spin around the room like a moth that had lost interest in the lamp. I thought of Jack the way you think of someone gone long enough that their absence is a shape you live alongside rather than a hole you fall through. I talked to him in the dumb, ordinary way we talk to the dead. I told him about the man who jogged around the lake every morning at 6 with a dog who hated his pace. I told him about the kid at the hardware store with the fan. I told him our boy had called me bad luck, and I'd finally believed a thing far enough to act on it, just not the thing he meant. Winter came, like a gentleman in a heavy coat, and sat down for a long visit. I learned where the draft slid in under the kitchen door and taped it. I learned the rhythm of the oil delivery route. I learned how stars look when the cold makes the sky a bell that rings only once and you feel the sound in your ribs. One afternoon while I was reading at the library, my phone buzzed and it was Lila. "I adopted the dog," she whispered. "They said yes. Mom didn't even fight that hard about it. He's a mutt. He looks like a loaf of bread with ears." "What did you name him?" I asked. "Waffle," she said and giggled, and I put my hand over my mouth so I wouldn't laugh out loud in the quiet place that had become a church for me. "Grandma," she said, her voice changing shape, "Dad, he's been worse lately." I know, I said. He's worried about himself. He says you're gonna come crawling back when you need him, she whispered, and for the first time since I left, I felt the old burn up my spine. I told him you won't. I won't, I said softly, but I will always answer when you call. She exhaled through her nose like a somersault had gone wrong, but she'd righted it. I keep the mirror by my door, she said then, and I almost dropped the phone. The one you left him. He put it in the hallway and wrote the curse on the back, just like you did, so he'd see it when he went out. He thinks he's making fun, but he looks at it every time. It took me a second to find my voice. Lila, I said, my throat tight, that mirror isn't for him until he decides it is. Is it for me? She asked. It's for anybody, I said. It's for the moment you tell the truth. Spring came slow as a person learning to trust a new friend. The lake loosed itself inch by inch from the ice, and the geese returned with their bossy complaints. Daffodils poked up near my steps like someone had left gold coins in the dirt. I bought seeds for a small garden, and on the day the hardware boy rolled the fan out, I bought a new hammer, even though Jack's hammer worked, because the old life needed less, and the new life wanted its own tools. One evening, Henry brought me a birdhouse he'd made as a demo for the kids. It wasn't pretty, but it would work. He handed it to me awkwardly, as if gifts were a costume he didn't quite fit, and I said thank you, in a voice that made him look at the ground. He fixed my porch railing with longer screws and told me I should consider painting the steps before the wood softened. I will, I said, and I did. The letter from Caleb came on a Tuesday in May. A real letter, not a text or a voicemail. The handwriting was the same as his third-grade homework, tilted, ambitious. He wrote that he'd seen the property manager's car outside my house again and stopped to ask her if she'd gotten my message. He wrote that he hoped I was having fun. He wrote that I was willing to forgive me if I came home and talked to the bank with him about giving him a second chance. He wrote that I was not the only one with a right to start over. I learned long ago to read what's underneath what people say. He was drowning. He wanted me to put my face under the water so he could stand on me and reach the air. I didn't write back. I took a walk and watched a heron step through the shallows like someone remembering how to dance. I went home and made soup. I watched a show where people fix old houses. I slept and dreamed that I was walking through the old house in Gull Point and found that the back wall was made of glass and the ocean pressed against it like a cat. In the morning, I brewed coffee and added one more rule to the list I kept on the inside door of my pantry. Do not answer demands disguised as invitations. In July, Lila turned 15. We spoke longer than usual. She told me Waffle had chewed Kenzie's sandal and Kenzie had cried instead of yelling, which surprised them both. She told me she wanted to come visit, but understood why she couldn't yet. She told me that before her birthday dinner, Caleb disappeared into the bathroom, and when he came out, his eyes were red and he hugged her too long. He's scared, she said, half anger, half mercy. He keeps saying you abandoned us. I did, I said, meaning I abandoned the wreck, but not you. In late August, the hospice center in Willow Lake asked me if I'd like to sit with a woman named Agnes during the afternoons while her daughter worked at the post office. I sat beside Agnes while she dozed and read her the poems she liked and rubbed lotion into her hands with the gentleness I'd been trained for and still believed in. The day she died, I was there, and so was the daughter. And I held both their hands because that's a theology I practice more reliably than any other. I went home that evening and wound the music box and held it against my belly and let the sound go through me. I thought of Caleb as a baby with a fever, burning so hot I had to cool his forehead with a cloth. I remembered how he leaned on me when he learned to walk. I remembered his spelling bee years ago when he stood at the microphone and asked them to use the word in a sentence, and the judge laughed and said, "I suppose we can." And Caleb spelled suppose wrong because he was busy smiling. There are so many ways a person can be beautiful before the world talks him out of it. He didn't come to Vermont. He never showed up at my door, and I was grateful for the mercy of that. But the town found out where I'd gone. Someone from Gull Point saw me at the diner and took a picture thinking she was discreet. I heard from a woman I hadn't spoken to in a decade who wrote, "You look good. Retirement suits you." I'm not retired, I wanted to say. I'm alive. When fall dipped the trees in colors that would embarrass a peacock, I got a call from Paul Redding. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, and the tone did that thing that makes the stomach brace. "Always," I said. "There's been an incident," he said. He told me the bank had reported a forged document. Someone had tried to create a power of attorney for my assets with the signature that wasn't mine in a notary file the size of a lunchbox. He told me the notary had noticed because people in small towns know other people's signatures better than they know their handwriting. He told me the bank had filed the complaint because if they didn't and someone took advantage of me later, they wouldn't sleep at night. "Was it my son?" I asked, although he didn't say and couldn't by law. "I can't confirm that," he said. I could hear his tie tighten. "What happens now?" I asked. "Nothing, if you want," he said, "or something if you're tired." "I am tired," I said, "but I'm also at peace. I don't want to go to war, Paul. I want to let the town do what towns do." He made a sound that wasn't quite amusement, not quite resignation. "You have a way of telling me to be a person instead of a lawyer," he said. "They pay you for one. I need the other." 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Caleb. This one was 3 lines. He wrote, "You told everybody. I hate you. Don't worry. You got what you wanted. I'm done." I put the letter in a drawer and walked out to the porch. The lake lay like a sheet smoothed by a mother's hand. I hadn't told everyone. The town had seen him long before I left. People who like to believe in goodness will try hard not to see the truth because truth hurts. But when somebody puts the mirror in the hall, there's a point at which you have to walk past it. Winter again. I learned the names of the plow guys by the way they drove. I baked bread because the house wanted that smell, and I wanted the proof that flour and water could become something soft if you handled them. One evening, I got a message from Kenzie. He's gone, packed a bag, said he needed to start fresh somewhere that didn't know him. Thought you should know. I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand a long time and wished I were the kind of person who didn't feel pain for someone who'd caused her pain, but I'm not. I felt it all, and under it, a quiet I had earned. In March, Lila called me crying. Waffle had died after gulping snow and getting sick in a way the vet couldn't fix. "He was only 3, she choked. "It's not fair." I wanted to fly to her and put my hand on her hair the way I used to pat the dog. I told her I loved her. I told her the thing nobody told me when Jack died because they were trying too hard to be kind. "It won't stop hurting," I said. "It will get quieter, but what you loved will keep ringing in you. It's how you know you are still the person who loved him." She sniffed loud enough to make the cat on my porch, half stray, half queen, turn her head. "Grandma," she whispered, "I told Mom I want to come see you the minute I turn 18. She said she won't stop me." I'll be waiting, I said, and hung up and went outside to look at the stars and thank whoever is in charge that my life had room for the future again. I did not see Caleb for 3 years. I saw the shape of his life in the vague way a person sees boats far out on the harbor, shadows and guesses. He moved to Worcester and worked night stock at a big store where the shelves go up to the ceiling and the lights buzz. He dated a woman with a good laugh who maybe got tired of having to use it to fill the gaps. He stopped answering Kenzie's texts. He called Lila on birthdays and forgot 3/4 of the time. He told people his mother had abandoned him. Some people believed him. Some took him to lunch. The spring Lila turned 18, she used the bus money I sent to come to Willow Lake. She stepped off on the gravel like a person stepping into a picture they'd been staring at so long they could draw it. She hugged me hard, and I felt her bones and the dogless space beside her. We took her back to the house and I made grilled cheese and tomato soup and put the good pickles on a plate. She said, "Everything smells like safety." And then she slept on the couch with her mouth open and I sat in the chair and watched the lake hold the weight of the moon. We had a week. We did nothing anyone would brag about. We walked the shops. We bought a mug at the hardware store because they started stocking pottery made by a woman who lives outside town and glazes in colors that make your hands thirsty. We went to the diner and let Ruth bring us too much pie. We sat with Mr. Peabody, who had gotten used to the way the afternoon leans, and Lila told him she was thinking of studying to be a teacher. He said, "Good. We need people who will teach children how to be humans first." And she wrote that down in her phone as if it were a homework assignment. On our last night, we sat on the back steps with blankets around our shoulders. The music box sat between us. I wound it and let it play, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you think Dad will ever come?" she asked. "I think everybody comes to the truth eventually," I said. "They either meet it like a friend or a cop." She laughed a little. "Which one would Dad pick?" "The truth?" I asked. "He tried to charm it first." She went back to school in the fall. Kenzie moved to a smaller apartment and took a job at the grocery store full time. She sent me a Christmas card that said simply, "I hope you are well. Thank you for loving Lila in the way that helped her love herself." It made me cry harder than any dramatic letter ever could. When Lila finished her first year, we called to plan a summer visit and she said, "Dad's in trouble." He'd taken out a loan with a man who didn't do paperwork and had tried to skip payments by changing his phone number. The man had waited for him outside the store. Somebody called the cops, and the whole thing had played out in a way that ends with people shrugging and saying, "Well, what did he expect?" It's a sentence I hate. Nobody deserves harm, but people do invite it to dinner when they lie and think they are the first person to try it. A week later, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. "It's me. I heard you have a porch." I stared at the words long enough for my coffee to go cold in my hand. Then I typed back, "I do. Can I come?" He wrote. I sat with that question for an hour. I cleaned the counter with slow circles. I fed the cat and put her bowl in the shade. I walked out to the porch and looked at the chair across from mine. It was just a chair. But chairs keep the shape of what sits in them. I thought of the mirror in his hallway and the way Lila said he looked at it. I thought of the law I had written as a curse and the way the world had enforced it on its own, like gravity. "You can come on Sunday," I wrote, 2:00. "If you raise your voice, I'll ask you to leave. If you insult me, I'll get up. If you ask me for money, I will say no. If you're sober, I will make coffee. If you're not, you will sit with yourself on the drive back and think about why you can't bring only yourself to your mother." He wrote back one word: "Okay." I spent the next morning cleaning, as if my house were a confession. I put the music box in the drawer, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want our conversation scored. I bought cinnamon buns from the diner and made a fresh pot of coffee. At 1:58, a car pulled into the dirt at the edge of my yard and idled like a person who wants to decide twice before he gets out. He did. He got out. He walked up the steps with that swagger that had fooled so many people, and me most of all, into thinking he was a man who didn't worry. He looked older than I remembered. Trouble will do that. So will shame. He smiled at me as if the porch light might not be on. I nodded toward the chair. He sat. His hands wouldn't stay still. I poured coffee into the 2 good mugs and pushed the plate with the buns between us. He didn't touch them. He stared at the lake like the lake had wronged him once and he couldn't put his finger on how. "How's life?" he asked, and I almost laughed. "It's good. I like the quiet. I like the library. I like Thursdays with the old folks. I like that my hands smell like lemon lotion sometimes, and I don't mind it." He nodded, like those were acceptable hobbies for a woman he didn't know. "Well," he said, "you did it."
Did what? Ruined me. He watched to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. "Tell me how," I said. "I can't get a loan. I can't get a lease without a co-signer. I can't keep a girlfriend because apparently they like men with furniture. My boss watches me like I steal, even though the only thing I ever stole in my life was a Snickers from the Rite Aid when I was 8. "You stole my credit," I said quietly. "You stole my sleep. You stole my ability to believe in the story I told myself about my son." His face did a thing that would seem small to a stranger. To a mother, it was a fish flashing in clear water. He wanted to argue. He couldn't. He said finally, but the tone was different, softer. The way a man might ask a neighbor if he can borrow a rake even though he returned the last one in pieces. "I could," I said. "I won't." He tried again. I know I said those things in Gull Point. I was just mad. "You were honest," I said. "I don't think you're bad luck," he said. "I don't care," I said, and I could see the words hit him. He looked at the space between us and found nothing to stand on. He exhaled. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Which part?" I asked. "The part where I'm not the one who got wronged," he said, even quieter. I nodded because the only true answer is nodding when a person says a right thing they can hardly stand to hear themselves say.
"Why did you come?" I asked him.
"I was driving and I thought," he said, and then he stopped. He stared at the lake. A fish jumped. He didn't see it. "I thought about that box you left me," he said. "The mirror. I used to spit on the word you wrote on the back. I used to think, what a joke, my mother and her drama. And then the other day, I couldn't leave the apartment without seeing my face, and it looked like the guy who ran the shop that flooded, and the guy who yelled at a baby for crying at the fireworks, and the guy who told his mother she was bad luck because he needed to aim his anger at something that wouldn't punch him back." I kept my hands still in my lap. I kept my breath easy. "Caleb," I said, and he flinched at the sound of his name like I'd turned the light on. "You don't get to come here and be sorry once and then be new. That's not how people work."
If it is repentance, it will be a road. It will be phone calls you make instead of ignore. It will be showing up to jobs even when the boss is an unkind little king. It will be saving $50 until you have $1,000. It will be not dating anyone until you can sit alone long enough to like the man in the mirror with the curse on his back. I thought you'd forgive me, he said. And now the boy was there. The 3-year-old who stood in his crib and called for me when he had a nightmare. The teenager who slammed a door and then sat behind it crying because adolescence had chewed him and he wanted to bite back at someone easy. I do, I said. What does that mean then? He asked, and now he sounded angry again. If you forgive me, why not help me? Because forgiveness is a gift I give myself. Help is a gift I give you. Those are not the same gift. He stared at me and then looked down at his hands like a person reading news he didn't want. He wiped his palms on his jeans and asked, "Do you ever feel bad, like about starting over without me?" "I feel bad all the time," I said, "but I don't feel wrong." "I thought you left me your curse," he said, halfway to a sneer. "I did," I said. "It's the truth. You can leave it on your hallway wall like a joke, but it works either way." He looked up at that, and for the first time since he arrived, I saw curiosity in his face, like the man he might have been if life hadn't made him so busy building stories to hide inside. "Say it again," he whispered. "Everything you try to take without love will turn to dust in your hands," I said. "Everything you build on contempt will buckle. Every dollar you wring out of someone who is willing to go hungry for you will sour in your pocket." He closed his eyes. "I hate that it's true," he said. "I know. That's why they call it a curse." He stayed an hour. We didn't solve anything a movie would have solved. He ate a cinnamon bun finally, as if it was a piece of penance, and he told me he had a lead on an apartment if he could get a letter from an employer saying he was steady. I told him to ask his boss for that letter, not his mother. He nodded. He said he was sorry again, and I said I knew. Then he stood up and said, "Can I hug you?" It had been so long since he'd asked me for anything that wasn't money that the yes came out of me like water. He hugged me, awkward, and I smelled his hair and remembered a little boy sleeping in the back seat and felt grateful for the miracle of time. He got in his car and drove away, carefully, his hands at 10 and 2, the way I taught him the summer he kept hitting the curb. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt like the world had been true for 5 minutes, and I had witnessed it, and that was enough. The next week, he sent a photo of a small apartment with a rug that had survived another family and a plant on the sill that might make it. He wrote, "Got the letter from my boss, starting in produce next week. It pays $1 more." I told him thanks instead of telling him I deserved it. He looked at me like I was new. I sent back a thumbs up. It was all the praise he needed. He would need to learn hunger in a good way. In August, Lila came again. She walked into the lake in her shorts and shirt and said, "It's not as cold as I thought," and then shrieked because it was. We cooked corn on the cob and ate it with butter dripping off our wrists. We sat on the porch, and she said, "Dad's different," cautiously, the way you try a porch step. "He's going to meetings." "What kind?" I asked. "The kind where he sits in a circle and tells people how he's been lying to himself. The kind where people call on it and then make him coffee." "Good," I said, and I meant it, the way you mean it when a person's boat has turned right side up, but they still need to bail the water. Fall turned, as it does. Mr. Peabody died on a Monday morning, with the sun doing that gentle thing it does along the floor. I was there. I held his hand. I told him he'd done a good job being a person. I went home and wound the music box and stood at the window and felt gratitude ache the way old injuries do when a storm is coming. On a Sunday in November, Caleb came again. He sat on the porch and told me about meetings without naming them because anonymity is a privacy you learn to like. He told me about a man who'd lost his whole life twice and was building a third one out of nails and bread. He told me he'd paid back $100 to a man he'd stiffed years ago. He said he didn't remember, Caleb said, almost laughing. But I do. That's the point, I said. I hate points, he said, and then smiled like a person who couldn't help it. But I'm getting better. We drank coffee and watched the lake. He looked at the music box on the shelf and asked, "Does it still work?" "It does," I said. "Can I?" he asked. "You can," I said. He wound it gently as if it were a baby's wristwatch, and the tune filled the room like forgiveness that doesn't need to explain itself. We stood there listening. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize again. He closed the lid and put the box back and rubbed the back of his neck the way he used to do before a test he hadn't studied for. He said, "I'm gonna go." And I walked him to the steps, and he hugged me again, and he didn't ask for money. And that felt like a holiday. The winter I turned 72, my hands began to stiffen in the morning. It didn't scare me. It felt like a thing I'd earned. I bought exercise bands at the pharmacy and did the stupid little motions while the kettle boiled. I started making soup on Tuesdays and bringing a quart to Ruth at the diner, and she started sending me home with pie, and we agreed not to keep the score of kindness like it was a sport. Lila called me in the spring to tell me she'd been accepted into a teaching program that placed students in small-town schools. "I wrote my essay about you," she said, embarrassed. "Not to be a suck-up. I wrote about how the bravest thing I ever saw anyone do wasn't rescuing anybody. It was choosing to rescue herself." "Send me a copy," I said, and when it arrived, I sat and read it slow so it would last, and then I cried into a dish towel like a person in a good movie. The summer after that, Caleb brought a woman with him. Her name was Danny, and she wore work boots with a dress and had the steady calm of a person who has survived on purpose. They sat on my porch and we ate corn salad, and they told me about the church basement where they met and the way the coffee tastes terrible and sacred. Caleb didn't call me Ma that afternoon. He called me Mom. It hit different. He never tried to take the music box out of the house again. The years have a way of turning into a pattern before you realize you're weaving it. Thursdays with the old folks, Sunday calls with Lila, holidays that involve too much food and not enough guilt, the lake turning from blue to steel to glass to blue again, the cat who never admitted she liked me dying quietly under the fern one afternoon while I was at the library, and me finding her and saying thank you because she taught me I could love something without being consumed by the fear of its loss. I didn't go back to Gull Point. I let the town invent its story about me. People who needed me to be selfish found the evidence they wanted. People who needed me to be brave found theirs. Sometimes if I closed my eyes, I could smell the harbor, the combination of salt and diesel and old rope that I associate with childhood and first love and the last day you believe you're going to be okay no matter what. Then I'd open my eyes and see the lake, which doesn't smell like anything at all most days, and I'd be grateful because blankness is a relief after a city of words. The last time Caleb came to visit, he brought a gift. He couldn't help himself. He grinned like a kid and handed me a heavy box. "It's not a scam," he said. "I didn't charge it. I paid cash and asked for a discount like a person who doesn't want to burn his life down again." I opened the box. It was a wooden mantel clock, small and square and dignified. On the brass plate on the back, he had them engrave 3 words, "Tell the truth." He didn't make a speech about it. He didn't ask for applause. He just sat down and drank the coffee and looked out at the water and hummed the tune from the music box because he lived with it in his head so long he didn't need the gears. When he left, he hugged me and didn't say he was sorry, and I didn't say I forgave him. I said, "Do you have gas money?" And he said, "I do." And we both laughed at how old and how new we were. This is not a story that ends with all the scripts rewritten. Kinsey never came to the lake. She sent me 3 more cards over the years, and then she stopped, which felt like peace. Lila graduated and moved to a small town in upstate New York, where she teaches 4th graders how to read like they're breaking locks off treasure chests. She visits when she can. When she can't, she sends me videos of her walking through frost with her coffee steaming like a small engine. We don't say everything to each other. We don't have to. Sometimes on quiet afternoons, I sit with the journal I keep and write down simple things. The sound of the wind and the birch, the way the neighbor boy's laugh turns into a cough when he forgets to breathe between giggles, the taste of a peach that finally got ripe, the way my own name sounds in my head when I say it gently to myself, like a friend would. If you asked me what the curse is today, I'd tell you it's not a thing I left on anyone's doorstep. It's a law of the heart I decided I would no longer break on behalf of people who wanted to pretend it didn't exist. The opposite of a curse is not a blessing. It's accuracy. Forgive? Yes, always, always. But let the consequences stand up on their own feet like adults. Let the story tell itself, even when it makes you feel like the villain of someone else's version. You owe the truth your calm, not your explanation. I am 75 as I write this. My hands are slower, but they know more. I wake early, not because worry lives beside me anymore, but because the birds do, and they don't know how to whisper. I make coffee and sit on the porch and watch the water do its one trick, which is everything. Sometimes I wind the music box and let it play while I stand in the doorway and marvel at the miracle that lives between notes. Sometimes I pick up the mantel clock Caleb gave me and feel its weight in my palm, and I marvel at the miracle that lives between apologies. I don't think I'm bad luck. I don't think anyone is. I think luck is a word we use when we don't want to own the ways we starved ourselves or feasted at tables that didn't belong to us. I think kindness without boundaries is wildfire, and boundaries without kindness is a fence with barbed wire at the top. And the life I finally managed to live is a garden with a gate that creaks when you come in and closes gently when you leave. I think my curse worked because it wasn't a spell. It was the truth, simply turned toward the person who didn't want to look at it. When I die, and I'm not in a hurry, but I'm realistic, I hope someone winds this music box one last time and lets it play for the gathering. And I hope Lila stands on my porch and tells anyone who can bear to hear it that I wasn't a saint and I wasn't a monster. I was a woman who learned too late, and still just in time, that love is not an alibi for staying where you are harmed. That living alone is not the same as being lonely. That being kind to yourself is not a failure of character. If you're listening to this wondering whether it is too late to start over, to leave the room that keeps convincing you that tomorrow it will be different, to write the letter that changes what happens next, I will tell you what my hospice patients taught me 1,000 times. Endings are only endings if you stop reading. Flip the page. The story will go on without your permission either way. You might as well help it become something you can stand to hear out loud. I end my days the same way I began them, with a cup on the porch and the lake telling me that stillness is not laziness.
I feel the sun on my face and think of Jack and Caleb and Kenzie and Lila and the people I held while they crossed and the ones I watched return from their own bad mirrors. I do not measure my life in what I gave away or what I kept. I measure it in how many times I told the truth when a lie would have been easier and kinder and wrong. If there is anything I leave to the world besides a music box and a mantel clock and some recipes that only work in my kitchen, let it be this. Everything you try to take without love will turn to dust in your hands. Not because I said so, because it already has. Because this is how we survive our worst parts and come out on the porch with coffee and the tune playing softly in the next room and say to the morning, I know you. I chose you. And then we sit in the light. And then, finally, we are free.